Today I'm going to be talking about the grace of God. I've had a lot of reminders of this lately. It was kind of just brought to my mind quite a bit throughout the summer. So I wanted to share with you a story from my own life of where I just really noticed the grace of God recently. But I also wanted to give you an example from the Bible because when I read through the Bible, especially the Old Testament, I don't know if this is like a popular opinion, but I love the Old Testament because there are so many amazing testimonies in the Old Testament. You can read through all the lives of these people who lived for God, and you can see from beginning to end kind of what their journey looked like. And then you can see the grace of God just kind of woven through their story. So I wanted to start by sharing what led me to this topic, but then I also wanted to go into an example in the Bible of where God's grace was just so evident. So this summer, I was thinking back. I actually found a bunch of my old diaries from when I was a kid. I was like the kid who wrote in my diary every day. So I had like diaries from when I was like in grade 2. It's actually kind of crazy. And so I'd just write like, I have a crush on Cody. So cute. You know what I mean? But then I got into kind of the preteen years, and they became more about like feelings. You know, I'm feeling this way about this. I'm just so angsty, you know what I mean? Like, so much going on in my brain. And I was reading through kind of my grade 6, 7 year of when things were, I would say that was probably like a turning point for me. I did have some pretty like, you know, rough times in high school as well, but grade 6, 7 was where I actually got in with kind of a rough crowd, which sounds weird when you're like a preteen. But I remember skipping school in elementary school. Like, I remember, like, with my friends just leaving. I was, like, 12. And I remember my friends talking to me about sending pictures, like, naked pictures of themselves to boys, which was a lot harder to do back then because there wasn't as much technology. But there was all these kind of things, and I was just, like, kind of on the fence, right? I was like, am I going to, like, do what they're doing? Am I going to do what my mom has always told me, my dad's always told me I should do? And I kind of went back and forth. But I had learned from a really young age, like, who God was. I was I was kind of raised in Sunday school. My parents prayed for me all the time. And so I knew what was right, if that makes sense. But I was on the fence of if it was worth living for it, you know? I was like, this is right, this is wrong, but maybe everything that they've told me isn't actually all it's cracked up to be. Maybe it's just more fun to go live in this way. So I was kind of on the fence, but I ended up landing in a place where I was like, no, I do not like who I'm becoming in this way. I want to go the direction that I've been taught to go. So that didn't mean that I had it all figured out. I was very, like, judgmental. I thought I knew everything, right? I was just like, wow, how could that person make that decision? That's pretty stupid. You know what I mean? Like, didn't think about how did they get to that point. Didn't think about what were the things that they had gone through, the pain they had gone through. I just looked at it black and white. I was like, that's wrong. Wow, they should know better. You know what I mean? Kind of self-righteous thinking, well, I've been raised to know better, so I could be the authority, right? I know what's right. I know what's best. So kind of as I read through that, I had some friends who, like I said, they were doing the wrong thing. In my diary, it was like, how can they not understand? You know what I mean? Like, how can they not see the path that they're going down? I just don't get it. You know what I mean? Not really a whole lot of, like, grace, not really a whole lot of love for them. Just kind of like, whatever. I don't need them anyway. I can just go off on my own. I know what's right anyways. And if they're not going to listen to me, obviously they're not very good friends. I had this friend, amazingly, I had a friend, who was like, she was just like one of those ones that kind of, she was having a hard time, but she was also really a close friend. She would come with me to church. She would come with me to youth group at the beginning. She also came with me to Bible camp in the summers. And it was really kind of crazy because our lives went in drastically different directions. We kind of drifted apart in grade 8. And at that point, I just lost touch with her. But this summer, I was so reminded of the grace of God because she contacted me and she was like, hey, I watch your church services online. Like, she doesn't live here. And she's like, and I know that you're a pastor, like, can you baptize me this summer? And I was just like, me? She's like, yeah, like, you were so influential in my life and like showing me who Jesus was. I was like, I was? Like, I was not living like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like thinking back to this diary that I had read, and I'm just like, did you know what I was thinking? Like, did you know, like, all the things that were going through my mind, like the disaster I was inside? Like, did you have any idea? No, I was just, I love that you invited me to come to church. I love that you and your grandma took me to Bible camp with you. That's where I met Jesus. And I was like, what? Like, that's amazing. And it wasn't me. Like, I was telling you guys, so one of the things that I would do is, like, again, very misguided young girl, I would be, like, at sleepovers, and I would, like, tell my friends about the end times at night. Like, I'd be like, yeah, there's this thing called the Mark of the Beast and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse when I was, like, 12. And my friends would be like, Mommy, what does this mean? I'm so scared. Like, I'm sure my parents probably got so many phone calls. And then here's this friend who I was friends with in grade 6 and 7. And she's like, you were influential in bringing me to God. And I was just like, okay, so clearly it wasn't me. I know what was going on in my mind at that time. But I found this really cool definition of grace. Grace is the value that God assigns where none existed, and the debt that God forgives that could not be paid. And I really love that because maybe in the world's eyes, especially if you had read through my journal, you could see where I would probably not have a lot of value. Like, you'd probably be like, who is this person who thinks she knows so much better? Who is this person who is so unloving? Who's this person who says things that don't need to be said at the completely wrong time? Like, how could God use this person to help someone else? And not to mention, I was also 12. So it's not like I was established and knew everything. I was going through puberty and all the hormonal changes, and everything's just wonky in your head. And so it's not like there was just this justification of who I was to help this girl. God just uses anyone. And that was really what was highlighted to me this summer. When I got to baptize my friend, it was a serious honor. It was really humbling because I was just like, I even tried to tell her, like, I was like, I don't really know, like, I can do it for sure. It's not like I have to be like so great, but the position that she put me in her life, I was like, I don't deserve that. I wasn't the best. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't actually good. And she's just like, no, like, whatever, God used you. And so I just kind of wanted to start this message with that this morning, because I think there's some people in here who maybe you've done some stuff and you've looked at your life and you're just like, yeah, I don't know how God's going to use this. Looking back before you knew Jesus, maybe some decisions were made and you're like, I maybe could do something for God, but then the enemy reminds you of your past. And he reminds you of all the things that you've done that would disqualify you from what he's asking you to do. But God has so much grace that he wants to use everything. He wants to redeem everything. And he wants to give us a fresh start so that we can serve him. And that takes a lot of pressure off. So I think that when we think about our mess, when we think about those things in our lives, we need to think about it through the lens of grace. I'm going to go through a story today in the Bible. This man's name is Jacob. You might have heard of him. We're going to be in Genesis, so pretty much the whole time we'll be there. If you have your Bibles, you can flip open to Genesis 25. We're going to start at verse 29. A little bit of a backstory. I like to kind of like understand the whole picture, so you'll have to bear with me as I tell the story. But the story starts with 2 twin brothers. The older brother's name, he was born just a little bit before. His name is Esau. Not really a common name in our culture. Maybe someone knows an Esau, I don't know. The second one's name was Jacob. He was the younger twin. So the Bible actually describes Esau as being extremely hairy, which I think is really funny because I feel like if it's written about in the Bible that you were hairy, then you were hairy. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, oh, like that, like, you know, he was bald. Like, that's something you notice, right? It's like he was hairy, like he was covered in hair. So just a side note, he was hairy. He also really liked to work in the fields. He liked to be outside. I kind of picture Esau, this is me giving my own kind of like, I'm thinking about it. I picture him to be like the kind of guy who he doesn't shower a lot. And he's just like, I'm kind of outside with the animals and I'm hunting and I'm like in the fields and I'm working. And then Jacob was kind of like the polar opposite of him. Jacob liked to be in the tents, it said. He liked to cook. He liked to be kind of inside. And I don't think he was hairy. We'll get to the reason why I don't think that. So they're very different. And there is some jealousy between Jacob and his older brother. He, I would say, has a lot of jealousy for his older brother. The reason why is because in that culture, it was normal for the oldest son to get all the benefits. The oldest son would become the head of the home when the father died. He would receive his father's blessing, and that was a big deal at that time. And they would receive the largest portion of the inheritance after their father died. So this must have been really hard for Jacob because he was like still born on the same day, right? He's like, we're twins. We have the same birthday. Like, we should get an equal share. You know what I mean? Like, what is this about the oldest? Like, just because he happened to come out like 2 minutes before me? But Jacob is younger, so he doesn't have access to all the things that his older brother does. He's not cool with this, and so he decides he's going to tip the odds in his favor. So we'll read in Genesis 25, verse 29 to 33. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field. He was exhausted, and Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I'm exhausted." Therefore his name was called Edom. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore it to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. So in our culture, we don't really talk about birthrights. It's not like something we really use very often. But basically what this would have been was his inheritance, right? This would have been what Esau was going to get when their father passed away. And so what was happening here is Esau was in the field. He's working all day, right? If you've ever done this where you've just like worked through your lunch before and you're doing like physical work and you're just like sweating and you're exhausted and you're coming in and then you smell some really good food cooking and your stomach just starts to cramp up and you're just like, oh, I didn't realize how hungry I was. This is kind of where Esau was. He's so hungry. And he comes in from the fields and Jacob has this like amazing red stew just cooking, just simmering over a fire. And he comes over, he's like, "Give me some food." And then Jacob's like, "Give me your birthright." And he's just like, "I don't even care about my birthright. I'm so hungry, like I'm gonna die." So like if you think about it logically, as someone who you probably had breakfast, you're probably just like, this is ridiculous. Why would you give up something so valuable for just some stew? I have a couple theories. I think Jacob was a really good cook. He liked to cook. So he was cooking all the time. I think that Esau was just like, "Oh my goodness, that smells so good. Like, just give me some of that food." But also, when we're depleted, we make dumb decisions. When we're depleted, whether it's physically, whether it's spiritually, we make dumb decisions. So Esau came in and he was hungry and he was depleted. And so he went up to him and he's just like, just give me something. I don't even care. You can take my inheritance. It means nothing to me anymore. And so he sold his birthright for a bowl of stew. But Jacob isn't done yet. That was what I call betrayal number 1. His second betrayal would come later, when his father was literally on his deathbed. So their father's name was Isaac. He went blind, or very close to blind. He could barely see anything, and he felt like he was about to die. He's like, this is it. Like, I feel like I could die any day. So he tells his oldest son, who was his favorite. It's actually funny, it says in there that Esau was his favorite because he loved wild game. So Isaac was just like, I just love that he hunts. It's amazing. I'm so hungry, and I just love eating wild game. So he calls his oldest son in, and he says, I'm going to give you my blessing now. Like, my final prayer over you, my final blessing, because I might die. So what I want you to do is I want you to go and hunt, get me some game, and then make me a meal. When you bring it to me, I'm going to eat it. It's basically his final meal. It's what he wants to eat before he dies. And then he says, then I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to bless you before I pass away. Back then, a father's final blessing meant a lot. They would basically speak life over their oldest son, and they would give them headship over the family. They would say, you are now the head of the home. All of your younger siblings now serve you. They would speak life over their finances. They would speak life over their family. And only one blessing like this was given, and it was to the oldest son. So their mother, Rebekah, she hears that Isaac's going to give his blessing to Esau. And Rebekah, she loves Jacob. As a side note, please don't have favorite children. It just never goes well. So her favorite son's Jacob. Isaac's favorite son is Esau. But Rebekah hears this, and she thinks, oh, Jacob needs that. She's like, Jacob, we're going to trick your father into giving you the blessing. So he says, Mom, like, I don't know if you noticed, but I'm not hairy. Esau is so hairy. What if, like, my dad wants to touch me? He's going to know. He's going to know that I'm not my brother. So she says, don't worry about it. Go get a goat. We're going to make your dad some food. So they do. He goes and gets a goat. They skin it. They use the hair from the goat to cover his arms and his neck so that if his father touches him, he'll feel like Esau. And then they take one of Esau's clothes, one of his robes, and they put it on Jacob so he smells like his brother. Then he goes into the tent, and because he feels and smells like his brother, Isaac falls for it. So we read in Genesis 27, verse 21 to 27. It says, then Isaac said to Jacob, please come near, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not. So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, who felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are like the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. He said, are you really my son Esau? He answered, I am. Then he said, bring it near to me, that I may eat of my son's game and bless you. So he brought it near to him, and he ate. And he brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, come near and kiss me, my son. So he came near and kissed him, and Isaac smelled the smell of his garments, and blessed him, and said, see, the smell of my son is as the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. So remember, Isaac is blind. So he's relying on his other senses. He's relying on his sense of smell. He's relying on his feeling to be able to tell if this is really Esau. But his ears are like, sounds like Jacob. So he doesn't think his son is capable of this level of deception. But actually, it's pretty crazy. You have to think about it. Like, I don't know if any of you have ever had your parents like ask you a direct question like that. But here he says, are you my son Esau? And like in my mind, if I was like doing this level of like lie, and my parents directly were like, I would be like, well, no, yes. But Jacob's like, yep, I'm Esau, right? You know, like not even a hesitation. And so Isaac's like, yeah, okay. And he blesses him. And Jacob has successfully taken his brother's inheritance, his brother's standing in the family, and his father's final blessing. Meanwhile, his brother Esau is out hunting, has no idea what's going on. So Esau, he obviously comes back. He goes to his father with this food that he has caught. And he's like, Father, I'm ready for you to bless me. And his father's like, what are you talking about? I already did. And so then it comes out what has happened, right? And Esau is clearly very angry at his brother. Jacob has betrayed his brother twice. And it's almost like he's just unrepentant about it, right? There's no like, I just felt like it was no explanation. It was just like, stole it. So Isaac realizes that when Esau comes back, with the food he's hunted, what has happened, that Jacob has stolen Esau's blessing. In Genesis 27:35-41, Isaac says, your brother came deceitfully. He has taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. Then he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Isaac answered and said to Esau, behold, I have made him lord over you, and all his brothers I have given to him for servants. And with grain and wine I have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son? Esau said to his father, have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me even also, my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Then Isaac, his father, answered to him and said, behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. So Esau hated Jacob. It wasn't like, I'm kind of annoyed with you. It was like a burning hatred that made him want to murder his brother. That tells you how serious this was taken. This blessing was almost a bigger deal to him than his inheritance was. He was so angry. But he wants to wait because his father is on his deathbed. He knows his father's going to die soon, and he wants to mourn him. He wants to have respect for him. But he says, like, after he passes and after I have properly mourned his death, I'm going to kill my brother. So this seems to be a pretty unredeemable situation. If you thought about yourself in this position, if you put yourself in this person's shoes, Jacob had done these 2 things, and now it's not like you can take that back. Like, what's done is done. The damage has been done in the family, and there's a rift there that is so deep that his brother wants to kill him. So Rebecca hears that Esau wants to kill Jacob, and she tells her husband, she's like, send him away, like, protect him. So he gets told by his father to leave and go far away to one of their extended family members and to look for a wife there. As a side note, it is definitely not in our cultural context, but back then, you were like, I gotta go find a cousin that I have to marry. That was just normal. Everyone here is just like, yeah, so. I thought it was weird. And he goes to his uncle, and he's like, all right, I'm going to find a cousin of mine that I can marry. It was also normal to marry more than one woman back then. Culturally, it was normal. So Jacob leaves. He starts this journey. He goes to his uncle's home, at the land of his uncle, and he sees his cousin Rachel. And he's just like, wow, she is so pretty. I think I'm going to marry her. That was literally all it was. He just saw her, and he's like, I'm going to marry her. So he goes to her father and asks if he can marry her. And Laban, he's like his uncle, he says, well, you can't just marry her. Like, you have to do something for it. So he agrees to work for 7 years for his uncle in order to marry Rachel. So 7 years come and go. It says that they went by really fast because he was so in love. He's like, it went by really quickly, like the blink of an eye. The wedding is held, and they have their feast, and then they go into the tent. I'm not going to go into detail about what happens there. Then the next day, he wakes up. It's light, and he can see everything. he rolls over to say good morning to his lovely wife, and it isn't Rachel. See? Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Gasp. It isn't Rachel. It is her older sister, Leah. And I feel bad for Leah because commentaries say that she wasn't pretty. I don't know if that's true. No one really knows because you can't look at pictures of what that was, But she wasn't considered to be beautiful as her sister. And so it says in the Bible, literally, that Jacob didn't love her. And he's goes up to his new father-in-law and he's like, "What have you done? I served you for 7 years. I worked in your fields to marry Rachel. Why am I married to Leah?" And Laban's like, "Well, I can't just marry her younger sister before she's married. That's an excuse, He's just like, "Okay, here's the deal. If you work for another 7 years, then you can marry Rachel." And he's like, "Fine." He just loves Rachel so much, he just doesn't even care. He's like, "I'll work another 7 years." And he's like, "You can marry Rachel next week, as long as you agree." So he makes this deal, and Jacob agrees. But as I was thinking about this, it kind of hit me that this is a little bit of a taste of his own medicine for Jacob. You know what I mean? Jacob had deceived his own father because his father couldn't see. And now he's deceived because he couldn't see. And it's just crazy because I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on what this was. But I don't think it was a coincidence. Because the deceiver had now become deceived. And it seems like Jacob is learning how it must have felt. And maybe that the consequences of what he had done weren't quite behind him, even though he had run away. So Jacob ends up marrying both Rachel and Leah, and he continues to work for his father-in-law. I don't want to know what those family dinners were like. I feel like if we think we have drama, if your father-in-law had tricked you into marrying both his daughters and then still working for you somehow, I feel like there'd just be some fighting or something. But despite everything, Jacob prospers in the land. So it says that Laban, who he worked for, his wealth grew. He had so much. He had many, many animals, and as Jacob worked for him, it seemed that everything that he touched got better. He also had many sons with his wife Leah, but only one son, Joseph, with his wife Rachel. It actually said in the Bible that God had grace on Leah because he saw that she wasn't loved by her husband. And so she was able to have more kids because God had grace on her. And he had compassion for her. So Jacob works for the family business, and Laban is like, it's almost like you're a good luck charm. Jacob's like, well, I want to go back to my family home. And he's like, just stay. I'm doing so well with you here. Can you just stay here with me? And then Jacob's like, fine, but I'm going to start taking a profit from the business. So he asks his father-in-law for all the blemished lambs and goats. He's like, anything that has spots, anything that's dark color, anything with stripes, I'll just take that as my wages. Laban thinks this is a great deal. I don't have that many spotted lambs. Sure, go ahead and take them. And then he separates all the spotted lamb, all the blemished animals from the rest of the herd so that the genetics wouldn't be passed down. But through God's grace, there are spotted and striped lambs born, even in the flock where there aren't any. And he gets to take those and add them to his flock. And so you start to see this rift happening between Jacob and Laban because he's like, well, wait, I thought that I was getting a good deal here, but now all of a sudden you're starting to benefit because you've kind of branched off on your own. And so God tells Jacob to go back to his people. He says, flee from Laban. There's some anger growing there. Go back home. Take all your riches, take your family. But Jacob knows that going back is going to mean facing his past, facing his brother Esau. So he sends word ahead to his brother. He's like, I'm coming back. Esau hears, and he gets a group of 400 men to meet his brother. So at this point, we don't really know what Esau's intentions are. We're not like, oh yeah, he's going to kill him still. But Jacob, I think, has a pretty good reason to think that's what's going to happen, because his brother's last words were that he was going to kill him. So obviously Jacob is terrified, scared for his life. He has a family now. He's not just going back on his own. He's like, if he kills me, he's going to kill everybody. All my kids, all 4 of my wives. I'm not going to go into how he got 2 more. Genesis 32, 7-8 says, Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into 2 camps, thinking, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that's left will escape. So this is Jacob's solution. He's like, okay, I am going to try to fix this on my own. I'm going to try to solve my problem by myself. But then he does what he should have done a long time ago, which is he cries out to God for help. In Genesis 32, 9-12, Jacob said, O God, my father Abraham, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me and the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So in this prayer, Jacob has humility. He acknowledges that he actually is undeserving of all the good that God has done. He sees and recognizes the grace of God in his life, and he's giving God the glory for that. He says, I'm undeserving of all that you've already done and your love. But if you could just intervene in this situation, if you could just show me grace one more time. My brother Esau is coming and I fear him. But then he tries again to do something else in his own hands. He puts together a gift for his brother. And it's like an attempt to stave off an attack. So it says in Genesis 32, 13-21, he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. These he handed over to his servant, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass on ahead of me and put a space between drove and drove. He instructed the first, when Esau my brother meets you and asks, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you? Then you will say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau, and moreover he is behind us. He likewise instructed the second and the third, and all who followed. You shall say the same thing to Esau. You shall say, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me, and afterward I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night at the camp. So he sends these 3 huge herds of animals, one after the other. He's like, okay, first one, you go. Gives them a little bit of space, sends the second one, gives them a little bit of space, sends a third one. And he tells each of the servants, you're going to say, this is a gift from your brother. What he's trying to do here is pay his own debt. He's trying to make peace with his brother before he comes face to face with him. But to recap, Jacob had cheated and manipulated his brother into giving him his entire inheritance for some stew. Then he had lied to his blind, dying father to get his final blessing. Then he had run away instead of dealing with the consequences. And then he comes crawling back with a bunch of animals, and he's like, please forgive me. Jacob is undeserving of grace in this situation. But we get this beautiful picture of God's grace in how Esau responds to his brother. In Genesis 33, 4-11, we finally get to see this reunification of brothers. It says, Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. When Esau lifted up his eyes, he saw the women and children, and he said, who are these with you? Jacob said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And lastly, Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, what do you mean by all this company that I met? Jacob answered, to find favor in the sight of my Lord. But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have to yourself. Jacob said, no, please. If I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. Thus he urged him, and he took it. So this is a really cool picture of what God does to us. It says here that Esau ran to his brother, that he embraced his brother, that he forgave his brother. This is a huge contrast to where he was at when Jacob fled. It was this grace that was just so overwhelming that Jacob said it was like seeing God's face. He's like, I know I'm undeserving. You can imagine what's going through his head. To be received the way that he was by his brother after everything he had done. And his brother didn't even want his gifts. He didn't even want him to try to pay back the debt. God had moved in Esau's heart. And as much as it was Esau showing God's grace, it was also a picture of God's grace over Jacob's life. God's grace is the value that God assigns where none existed, and the debt that God forgives that could not be paid. There were so many instances in this story where God had grace over Jacob. He kept him safe on his journey. That was God's grace. He was on his own, wandering through the wilderness, and God protected him and sustained him until he got back to the home of his family. He also provided him with a large family. He had many, many kids, which at that time and still is a great blessing, but we just don't see it that way sometimes in our culture. He had many, many kids. And his father didn't even punish him. There was opportunity for his father to be like, Jacob, what have you done? But he instead sent him away. And he even kept him from being ripped off by his father-in-law in their business deal. Then he brought him back to the land of his family so that he could be reunified with his brother at the exact right time. God's grace is all through this story. All the good that came out of Jacob's life was not by his own strength, but by God's grace. And God took the situation that he was in where we think that is unredeemable. There's no way anything good could come out of that. He took that situation and he flipped it. But we can't look at this story and be like, yep, that was Jacob. That was all him. It wasn't. And the reason that I think there's a verse that talks about this, it says that my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. 2 Corinthians 12:9. That means that God uses our weaknesses. He used Jacob's weaknesses to show his glory. And God is ultimately glorified through this testimony in the Bible and through our own testimonies. He's the one that gets the glory. And it's the same way that God's grace covered me as a child, as that 12-year-old kid who was a mess and who still is a mess half the time, maybe even 3/4 of the time. His grace covers my life. So when I go forward and I'm like, God, I'm not sure if I'm on the right path. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I'm seeking you. I'm trying to be obedient. He's like, it's okay, I got you. I'm giving you value. And I'm paying that debt that you couldn't pay. God's grace is enough for us, and when we are weak, he is glorified. 2 Timothy 1:9 says, he saved us and called us to a holy calling, not because of our works, but because of his own purpose and grace, which he gave us in Christ Jesus before the ages began. I'm going to call the worship team up. But this is a grace that we all desperately need. It's a grace that Jacob needed. It's a grace that I need over my own life. It's a grace that each of us needs if we want to have anything good come out of what we're trying to do here. Because even if we don't think it can amount to something, God can redeem anything and use it for his good. It's like that verse in 2 Timothy. He saves us, he calls us, he equips us, he strengthens us, and then everything that good that comes out of it is because of him. We have very little to do with it, if you really think about it. All we can actually do is what Jacob did in that prayer, is humble ourselves before God and accept his grace. Humble ourselves before God, admit we need it, and then accept it. That's all we got to do. And what I learned this summer is that in our obedience to God, despite our slip-ups, despite the things that we look back on and we're just ashamed of, or the things that we look back on and we cringe about, we can actually be a part of what God's doing in the lives of others. We can be a part of ministry in our city. We can be a part of showing people God's love in our community. Not because of our own works. Like I said, we have very little to do with it. But because God chooses to use us and because of his grace over our lives. When I got to baptize my friend this summer, I kept thinking, wow, I feel so undeserving. This is such a great honor. But what really got highlighted to me was that it isn't about being deserving. We are actually all undeserving. There isn't a single one in this group that could deserve the grace of God. But it's about allowing his grace into our lives and then being a part of reaping the benefit. Isn't that crazy? We don't have to do anything other than just say yes and ask God to be over that situation. And then he lets us be a part of the harvest with him. We get to see the benefit of what he's doing. We get to be a part of it. And that's such a great honor. And it's not something that we could repay. But this message reminds us that it's not about being perfect, but we have a gracious God that pays the debt that we couldn't pay and gives us value when no one else sees it. And some of you here today, you need to hear this. You need to hear that you're valuable. You need to hear that you're loved. You need to hear that you have a purpose. You need to hear that all that stuff in the past does not define you and that God has a new future for you. Some of us need to hear that. But it isn't because of all the things that you've done. It's because he had grace over you and because he loves you and wants you to be a part of what he's doing. So I want to close in prayer today, but there's a ministry fair going on. And on this topic, I just want to say there are so many places you can get involved. And maybe some of you guys, it's been the reason you haven't gotten involved is because you feel like you can't. You feel like there's all these things that disqualify you, like you just don't deserve to be a part of what God's doing, like you don't deserve to have a place here. I just want to say that's a lie, because you have a place here, And there's a purpose for you here, and there's a place to get involved at New Life where you can serve, where you can utilize the skills that God has given you, where you can use your story to encourage people and to glorify God. There's a place for you. There's a team for you. There's a community for you. And there's a relationship with God for you. Not for just collectively you, but for you individually. So if that's something that you've believed and that's something that's holding you back, I just want to encourage you to take a step out. You can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If you feel stuck in the past, if you feel held back, try something new. Try saying yes to what God's putting on your heart. Try saying yes to a community of people who want to support you. And even though we're all messed up too, we can hold each other up. We can pray for each other. We can love each other. And we can be there for each other when things get hard. So I encourage you guys today, go and visit the booths. Not that it's limited to what's here, but it's a great place to start. Go talk to some of the people that are already involved and see how you can help them and how you can be a part of what they're doing. And maybe you'll make some awesome connections. And maybe it'll draw you closer to God. So I'm just going to close in prayer, and then we're going to close in worship today. But don't leave without at least checking it out or spending some time praying about how you can be involved. God, I just thank you for your word. I thank you that even though these stories happened so long ago, we can learn so much about who you are through your word. I thank you that we can learn about your character and your grace and your love through the story of Jacob and through testimonies of the people here. God, I just pray that you would humble our hearts before you. God, that you would just make us low before you, that we would recognize your grace over our own lives, the areas where you have just poured out your grace, the things that you have blessed us with, the areas of our life where we have flourished, but not because of us, because of you. Help us to be obedient, to step out in those things that you've called us to, God, in those areas where you're asking us to step out of our comfort zone, God. I pray that you would draw us closer to you and show us what is in your heart for us. Show us the barriers that are between us and you. Help us to desire to remove those things and remind us of your grace over our lives. I pray that you would speak to each person here individually as we worship, and that you would just have a special word of encouragement for each person, that they would leave this place feeling changed and feeling closer to you and with a new direction for what you have for their lives. We just pray these things in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.